Kia ora, Quentin. How are you today?
G'day, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Where are you joining us from?
Wanaka today and just at home in my home office. So.
Excellent. Sorry, just distracted by something popping up on my screen there. So thank you so much for giving us the time today and also for standing. Could you just maybe let the audience know how many terms you've done on council so far?
So this is effectively my third term, which is 9 years. I ran as both community board and a council candidate in 2016. I got on the community board at that time, and then a year later there was a by-election, and then I got onto council. So I've had about 8 years on council, 9 years in total.
Excellent. And what made you decide to run again?
Oh, look, I actually strangely enjoy the job. It's been a really tough term, and definitely had its ups and downs, but I do enjoy the job, and I do believe that it fits well with my expertise and experience as well.
Okay. And have you found any terms more difficult than other terms, or has it all been quite similar? What has that looked like for you over the time? Because you are a seasoned councillor, so seeking your wisdom is good.
Yeah, look, they've all been different in different ways. The first term was Jim Bolt's first term, and there was a very strong sense of a council that could do anything, and there was opportunity and money and desire for change. So in some ways that was a more positive, progressive council, and that there was a real vibe around it. Look, there were some ups and downs around direction and worldview, but as a entity, it really was quite positive. The second one was obviously marred by COVID, and it was that was the primary challenge of that term, that we had just that massive world disruption in there, and obviously had to respond financially and bring our community through that. And then the third one, which is the one we're just coming to a close now, which I think has been really challenging, and for a whole bunch of reasons, not least of which were the leaky homes claims at the very beginning of the term. The settlement of that, which has just left us in a very difficult position financially. We've also had some big challenges like the Alliance and like Lakeview, and but more recently is Project Shot Over. So there's been a couple of big challenges, and they've been made this term particularly hard.
Well, it's good to hear that you still enjoy it, and thank you for starting again. So you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that you enjoy the job and it kind of aligns with your background. Do you want to just touch on, I guess, if you don't get in, what will you be doing the day after? What's your expertise and your background?
It's quite broad, but a lot of connected to local government. So I have worked in Australia in bushland and reserve management, and right down to managing contracts and developing plans of management. I've been involved in environmental consultancy, so around threatened species and fauna conservation, and environmental education in Australia. So that was sort of one side of it. Mostly in New Zealand, I've been involved in resource management, and so I actually ironically worked for council as a planner almost 20 years ago now, right. And then have worked as a consultant planner, and then obviously and I've run my own business as well in the disability sector, and then been involved in planning from this side of the fence as well, including commissioner work. So resource management planning is a big part of what I've been involved with.
Thank you. And some of the things that you touched on in terms of some of the challenges we might come back to. This conversation is very much about the kind of person behind it, because I believe and I guess that's the angle that I've taken, is that the characteristics and qualities of an elected member are just as important as the skills that they bring. The skills that they bring are crucial and fundamental, but your ability to influence and negotiate, etc., is a big part of the job. So with that in mind, I've asked everyone kind of what worldview they bring to the table. And what I mean by worldview, it's quite a wide question. So it could be like any kind of political theories that you align with without telling us how you vote. It could just be the lens that you look at the world through. Does that make sense? Or do you want me to give you some examples?
No, I think it does. I think I term myself what I call a realistic environmentalist in a way.
Okay.
I think that plays a big part. Is I really value the outdoors and the environment we live in, but I'm also equally conscious of the realities of living in a growing large population. So I'm conscious of those things. I think social justice is an overwhelming thing. That fairness and social justice is something that really drives a lot of what I do. Is I really want things to be fair, and that includes for everybody, not just for minorities, not just for. I just have an overwhelming sense of wanting things to be fair.
Okay. And so with that in mind then, when we come to the table to discuss some of these really big issues, which often are about things like, or have outcomes that affect fairness, what kind of skills do you think are important for any councillor to bring to the table in terms of their ability to deliberate, make decisions, etc.? What have your learnings been there?
Well, you certainly you can't do anything as one person really in politics. You have to be able to bring people along with you, and you have to work with others. So look, at any given week, I don't know how many phone calls and discussions and emails I have dealing with staff and other councillors and members of the public. But really that sense of engagement and collegiality, consensus building is absolutely one of the most important things. That being able to truly weigh up the evidence and work through complex and difficult things is a skill that's really difficult, and try to be as objective as possible. In many cases, I find I'm not so fixated on what the exact outcome needs to be, but rather that we get there in a really productive and meaningful way that balances the needs of all the different parties involved.
Okay. And you're one of 12, so you just mentioned that your ability to kind of work with others and consensus building, etc. So you're one of 12, which means that you play an important role in a governance role. What qualities are you looking for in a mayor? So we've got a few different candidates running. In terms of you feeling like as a team in governance that you can achieve what you want through that kind of collaborative consensus building, etc., what qualities are you looking for?
I think the most important thing is that it's somebody who's prepared to lead and somebody who's prepared to build consensus. Now, it's not always possible to gain consensus, but you have to make sure that everybody has equal opportunity to be heard and argue their points, and then accept that the majority rule, or the majority sort of direction tends to be where you head. But I don't think it's sufficient to just accept that you get across the line each time. You've got to try and bring people along with you, and you've got to try and bring as many people along with you, ideally everybody.
So what do those characteristics look like in terms of leadership, do you think?
Someone who's prepared to put their own views aside sometimes, and to be calm and measured in their approach, be very fair in how they facilitate the voices around the table, and someone who's prepared to compromise in coming to a solution.
Okay. And this is a slightly uncomfortable question, but what role do you think ego plays? Because I've talked about the characteristics of kind of leadership in our mayor, but in politics globally, we see huge egos, and egos can potentially help or hinder. What do you think that ego plays a role in politics, and do you have an ego?
I think there's a difference between ego and confidence, and I don't think any of us would be here if there wasn't a certain amount of confidence that we could represent our communities and also get the backing of our communities to be here in the first place. But I don't think ego should play any role. I think ego is something that is more self-serving and is driven by a desire for power and acknowledgement, and I don't look. If I did it for the acknowledgement, I certainly wouldn't be here, because we cop a lot of flack, and it's really difficult at times. So, you know, if I did it for my ego, I'm doing absolutely the wrong thing, because it's not good for your ego. And yeah, I don't think that ego should play any role.
If only, hey, if only it didn't play any role in local politics or politics. And yeah, talking about, I guess, your status, your social status, I'm quite looking forward to, I used to think I was quite cool, but that's diminished since I've been a councillor. So I'm looking forward to maybe,
You're cool, Esther. You are cool. Just own it.
So can you describe a time at all, like we've just talked a lot about the deliberative process, can you describe a time at all where you may have changed your mind on something, or like held a view or an ideology and it struck you as or it's quite confronting to yourself? The reason I ask it is because I've found that quite challenging, where you know, we're represented by a cohort of people. There's going to be bias in that because we're representing our cohort. We have a certain ideology which matches those around us, because we, you know, naturally hang out and lean towards people that we have similar biases towards. So if you can't give an example, don't worry, but can you describe a time where, and it could be in your personal life, where you've held a certain view of something and then you've kind of completely changed or had to be open-minded?
Yeah, well, look, in my personal life, I can certainly use an example, is that as a parent, before I had a child, I was adamant that I would have been nurture over nature. How you bring a kid up was more important than who they are. But having been a parent, I'm very strongly shifted in that view, that I think that there are so many characteristics of who you are that are just inherent to your makeup and not dependent on how you're brought up. So that's one example. I can use the council example too, in that the decisions that were made, for instance, around the alliance at the time, based on the cost and the model, the benefits of the model and the cost projections that were given to us at the beginning.
Just for listeners, maybe just describe the alliance, what it is.
Oh, the alliance is a collaboration between NZTA, QLDC, and some contractors that was set up to deliver the arterials project, and also now subsequently the work that's going on at the BP roundabout in Frankton through NZTA. So it was a collaborative model. But yeah, as I said, at the time when those decisions were made, I think they were reasonable decisions, because they were based on certain cost assumptions and the ability to govern that in a certain way. In hindsight, I don't think that model's been particularly successful, and certainly hasn't been cost effective.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and we've recently brought up, I guess, examples with the water CCO and the challenges around, I guess, new information coming in late, issues around scoping that have been somewhat inadequate. Leaky buildings has come up, so maybe we touch on that for a second, so that the viewers can understand. The leaky buildings issue is determined based on New Zealand legislation, which leaves the council as the last man standing, as the framing of it. And that legislation means that all liabilities, rather than proportional liability, sits with the last entity that's still in existence, which is usually councils. So ratepayer pay the burden. And that's not to say that there's no negligence whatsoever, but proportionality is important. So I think it's helpful to explain that to people, not to condone anything, but to, to just help people to understand that those vast costs that have come to us this term were not proportional to the liability held. And also that that's changing. We're just hearing reports of proportionality legislation coming in. So I don't know if you've got any comments around any of that aspect, or costing or infrastructure or anything else that kind of concerns you.
Yeah, well, as you said, I mean, that was, and I said this to the new councillors, and that was one of the very first decisions the new councillors on this council had to make, was one of the toughest decisions that any will put before any councillor. They're not the ones who made the decisions, or even the staff that currently within council made any of the decisions, but we're stuck bearing the burden of that and the burden of that decision. Now, you're absolutely right, is that while council appeared to have made some mistakes in there around inspections and various things, that there were mistakes by a whole bunch of parties, including contractors and builders and the materials and the designers and the engineers and all sorts of people who equally, should have borne some of the liability. Now, as you said, that the last man standing thing has really leaves council with no choice. The decision or the direction by the changes to the Building Act and the code that provide for proportional liability is, I think, a massive improvement, and that could have left council's liability as being an absolute fraction of what it was in that case.
And it also might drive changes in the building industry, so that we don't have developers that set up an entity and then best practice for them is to just close that entity down immediately afterwards.
I don't know the full details.
But let's not go down that
changes proposed, but certainly the one around proportional liability was absolute game changer for councils moving forward.
Okay, so we're coming probably towards the end of our conversation. Let's just touch on governance, because obviously, as an elected member, your role will be to continue in governance. What do you think good governance looks like in local authorities?
I think good governance, as I said, is centred around consensus building based on good information and debate and discussion. You don't need to be an expert to be a governor. You don't need to be a subject expert to be a governor, but you do need to be able to distill and absorb information and to weigh and balance up different things, and talk and debate about the pros and cons of different directions. The information, our decisions are only as good as the information that we receive, and we need really good and thorough information that's reliable to base our decisions on. It's simply not possible for a councillor to be an accountant, an engineer, an architect, a roading expert, a scientist, and a project manager, and all those things, and they don't have to be. Each councillor brings their own skill set to the table, and there are some amazing skill sets at this table and any table. But we need to just be really mindful of hearing each other and making decisions that we can stand behind and represent our community in. And ultimately, that's our responsibility, is to represent our community, to make good decisions and ensure that our community are looked after.
Thank you. And have you got any parting comments that you want to leave listeners with?
No, only that elections are an absolute privilege, and we should value them. You should get out there and vote, and that you should vote for the people you believe in. Now, we've got a broad mix of candidates on the table, and we're fortunate enough to have an election in each of the wards. And so learn what people have to say, ring them up, email them, read all the bits and pieces in the papers and the podcasts and various things, and make your best decisions. So.
Yeah, great parting message, to make sure that you vote. And it doesn't really matter who, well, it does matter who they vote for, but actually voting is the first step, right?
Yeah, well, look, I hope that I'm back there, and I hope that people do trust and value my contribution. But if I'm not, I accept that, and because that is democracy.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time today, and best wishes for your campaign. And thanks for standing again.
Thank you.